I want to talk today about this thing in life where many times we get to a point to where we ask ourselves the most important questions. We ask ourselves, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing or accomplishing? What is it that I can do to fulfill the promises and the purposes that God has for my life? How do I do that? I always get to the point to where I have, more questions than I have answers, and maybe you've been there too. But I started thinking about all this, and I started writing a little story the other day. And what I'm going to do is kind of walk through this story with you, because it was a time for me that I took a really close, introspective type look at my own life and the way I've been living and the things that I've done and the things I haven't done, and how God has kind of filled me with what I should be doing, and many times where I've missed what God was trying to tell me that was the purpose of my life at that particular time. So I'm in here in the church the other day, and I'm really searching for God. In my heart, I'm praying, I'm reading, I'm walking from one place to another, and I spent an hour or so, a couple hours probably, just talking to God and asking God, what is it that you want me to do? What is it that you want me to talk about? What are the sermons you want me to give? What are the places that you want me to go? What are the people that I need to engage with? What is it that I need to be doing? Well, I started to get a little bit depressed. I started to feeling a little bit like, oh man, God, if you would just send me an email or talk to me, then everything would be fine. I'd figure it all out because you'd tell me. Well, I decided that I was getting nowhere. And there's a friend of mine that is an older gentleman, and he's not doing very well, and I wanted to go visit him that day. So I went outside, walking toward my car, and I go from inside the church outside to this beautiful, gorgeous day. I mean, the sun is shining, and there's birds flying around and insects, and you can see the ants crawling around, and I was overwhelmed by this sense that God has created abundant life all around me. I mean, it's everywhere I look. I could, look up in the sky, I see birds. I look down the ground, I see ants crawling around. I see bugs and stuff flying around, and I see flowers and all kinds of stuff. And it really was overwhelming because I'm like going from a place of frustration to a place of abundant life. Well, I was going to visit this older friend of mine, and he was, not doing real well, kind of in the final stages of life. And in actuality, he's kind of in rough shape, and right now he's in an adult foster care system in a home. Well, I got in my car and I started driving, and I did the thing that I always do. And that is, I've told you all before, I don't turn the radio on because I like to use that drive time as a time to think things through, as a time to converse with God, a time to consider, what is it, God, that you want me to do? What is it that you want to say to me today? What are the things that you have waiting for me to glean from our relationship? Well, the drive was pretty much, the same thing I always do, somewhat boring if you want. But I was reaching out to God and asking God about my purpose in life and what it is you want me to do. Where's my next step going to take me in life? And I started thinking about how frail life is, how life is here and I'm in the midst of it, and I didn't ask for it. I was born into this, and I didn't create it. I did nothing. All of a sudden, I wake up one day, and here I am in the middle of life. And I realized that, you know what, I don't deserve the many blessings that God has poured out on my particular life. I don't deserve them. But it is in his nature to do that. So I driving along and I give God thanks and I give him praise for, the blessings and the communion and the opportunity to just share with him the things that are inside my heart. Well, I got to the place that I was going and I parked my car. And this is very unusual for me, but I immediately noticed this massive wall of flowers that I had parked in front of. And there's all kinds, most of them are yellow. I don't know what they are. I'm not very, organically motivated or inclined that way, so I don't really understand and know the terminologies. But anyway, I see all these beautiful yellow flowers, and they're kind of swaying a little bit in the wind, kind of like they're waving at me. And I see these insects and bees and things flying from one to the next, and they're gathering pollen and gathering the nectar out of these flowers. And I'm kind of considering those bees and what they're doing. And I'm like, well, why are they here? Why are the bees here, God? What are they doing? Are they fulfilling your purpose that you have created for them? Do we really need them in this structure of life that you've created? Are they happy? I mean, I don't know if bees can be happy or not, but did they have any sense of completeness or a sense of purpose, or what is it that drives them to do the same thing day after day after day? I mean, they basically eat, work, and and that's it. They go and do it over again. They feed their young in their nest with the pollen that they collect. And I thought about all that and how God has orchestrated a particular purpose for the bees. And then, of course, I'm sitting in the car and I start reflecting on my own life. God, am I just kind of like the bees? Am I just doing things to survive, or doing things simply to go on to the next event? Or, am I doing things to provide for my family and to benefit them? And then that's my purpose in life. I mean, what is it about life and the purpose in life that we're missing? Well, I started remembering King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes that he wrote. See, King Solomon, he wrote this book called Ecclesiastes, and if you haven't read it, please do yourself a favor and go back and read that book. It's in the Old Testament. And Solomon wrote this book of Ecclesiastes as his own personal benediction for his own life. You see, he was sharing with others what life had taught him. Solomon had begun very well, and he had a lot of things ahead of him that he was born into. He was chosen by God to be the king over Israel, and from an infancy, when he was first born, he was already in line for the throne. And he ends up growing and growing up, and he had power and position, he had authority, he had tremendous prosperity. And one day God asks Solomon, what is it that you would like? What is it that you want? Just name it and I'll give it to you. Well, Solomon was smart enough, this is when he was a kid, Solomon was smart enough to ask God for wisdom, because Solomon knew as a young person, I really don't have all of the wisdom that I need in order to lead the nation of Israel in godly ways. So he wanted to do God's will. He wanted to fulfill the purpose for which God had brought him into the world. So Solomon asked for that, and God gives him great wisdom. But despite all of the different gifts and things God had given to Solomon, later in his life he started to drift away from God. So he writes this book of Ecclesiastes at the end of his life as he reflects on the lessons that he had learned through his life. He writes in Ecclesiastes, in the first chapter, he writes, he uses this phrase over and over and over again, and the phrase is chasing after the wind. He uses it various different times through the book, and he sets it off right away in chapter 1 in verse 14. He says it's a chasing after the wind, and he sets the tone for the entire book. And he's talking about life and life's accomplishments and the purpose of life and what I do in life and what I can be doing or what I should be doing and what I have done. And he looks back on many of those things and he says it was like chasing after the wind. In Ecclesiastes 1:14 it says, I have seen all the things that are done under the sun, and all of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. This chasing after the wind phrase is really a metaphor for pursuing futility, for pursuing the things that are futile in nature. They don't last. They don't have enduring meaning. They don't make eternal changes. He's talking about things that maybe are here today but gone tomorrow. And he reflects on how his life, the things that where he found meaningful in life, were the things that had eternal significance. Solomon lists in the book of Ecclesiastes many of the different vain pursuits that he considers to be, chasing after the wind. When he says he knew all things that were done under the sun, he's saying, I've done a lot of different things. I've had the ability and the affordability to do these things as king. He says, but, I've also looked at the lives that other people have lived too. And, a lot of these things, some of them are good, some of them were bad, but most of them were like chasing after the wind. He talks about in the book how sometimes, we seek pleasure, we seek immortality, we become envious of other people, and we compete with our neighbors, and, we try and make a lasting name for ourselves, but all of these things are futile in their very nature. So let's go back to my story. So I went inside, I parked, and I reflected on the bees and the flowers and all those things. And I went back inside, and I was confronted with this unique smell that many times you encounter when you go into adult foster care home or a facility of some sort. It reminded me of despair. It reminded me that, many of the residents in this place that I would visit or I would see were coming to that final chapter of life. They were at a point to where all of the things that they had done before in life, many of them no longer had the same meaning that they did when they did them. So I thought about Solomon again as I was walking into this facility, and that phrase, chasing after the wind, was just eminent right in the front of my mind and my thoughts. I thought about, for many of these residents, coming to that final chapter of life, looking back on the things that maybe they had done in life or experienced in life, how many of them looked back on those things and agreed with Solomon? This stuff that I did in life was like chasing after the wind. It has no meaning for me here today. There's no real purpose, no eternal significance. And I thought about many of those residents, and especially the one I was going to visit, and I thought, I wonder if they're like the bees. I wonder if they've lived life like the bees, simply doing and gathering and supporting and providing and, going from flower to flower, and then tomorrow we're going to do it all over again. Is that the way that they've lived life? Is that the way I've lived my life? Well, again, most of them had gotten to the point to where this was the final chapter of life. There was no more being faced with, the prospects of, prosperity in the future. And no, now we're thinking more about closing the book, so to speak. When I made it into the to the room of my friend, he didn't recognize me. He didn't know who I was. That was very discouraging. And as I started talking with him, he started referring to different events and things that I know never happened. So he was kind of in a place where his life was coming to that close and he was losing touch with reality. He was losing touch with many of the things that used to be a priority in his life, like people. And like the relationship that he and I had. We had a good relationship, but now it was being lost. I remember thinking to myself, Solomon wrote about how life comes to that closing point. And like a lot of things in life, when we experience certain stages of life, we reflect back on the stages that we went through before, and we reevaluate them. Were they good? Were they bad? Were they meaningful? Did they make a difference in my future? Again, or was it like chasing after the wind? You got to remember that Solomon, he is a guy that really, if you looked up the word opulence in the dictionary, I think you would see Solomon's picture there, because he lived a life of opulence. He had everything. He had all the money, the wealth, the status, the fame, even the wisdom. He had everything going for him. But he gets to the end of his life and he's like writing this, this letter to people that would read it, saying, this is the evaluation of my life. This is my final benediction, if you will. Ecclesiastes 12, though, sums up what Solomon said was really the point of it all. He sums up what life really means. He sums up what is important in life, what's not chasing after the end, or chasing after the wind, or chasing after something that's futile. And this is what chapter 12 tells us in there. He says, now all has been heard, and here is the conclusion of the matter. And he's saying, I've considered everything that I've done in my life, all the things that I've practiced and trying to see purpose and pleasure and fulfillment. He says, I've looked at other people's lives and how they've lived. He says, here's the conclusion of the matter. And he continues, he says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all of humankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it's good or it's evil. That was Solomon's conclusion to a life of opulence, a life where he could try and test all the different avenues that he could pursue. He comes to the conclusion that it's all chasing the wind. The only thing that is meaningful in life and gives purpose in life is to honor God and to follow the statutes of God, to follow the plans and the purposes that God has for your life. So let me ask you, how many of the accomplishments of your life have the same meaning today that they did years ago? How have your priorities in life changed? If you had the opportunity to live your life over again, what things would you do differently? 30 years ago, if you're that old, is the purpose that you considered for your life the same today as it was, say, 30 years ago? And with all that being said, do you know what the purpose of is your life today? Can we still look at our life like Solomon did? Can we look at our lives today and say, I've realized that much of what I've gone after in the past was simply chasing after the wind. My goal in life now should be, if it's not already, should be to follow the will of God and to proceed in following through on that relationship and pursuing that relationship for all of eternity. So I get back into my car after visiting my friend, and I'm thinking about I've been thinking about all this stuff now for several hours. And this thought hits me in my mind, in my heart. And the thought is this: how can I express to my children the importance of these life lessons so that they won't make the same mistakes that I've made? So that they won't make mistakes chasing after the wind and then later in life look back and say, well, if I knew then what I know now, it'd be different. You see, that's kind of what Solomon's thought process was, as he's writing this final benediction of, what the purpose of life is and what he's learned, so that we in the future can look at these things and say, let me glean from his experiences and not follow things that don't have eternal significance, but instead let me follow the plan that God has for my life. The book of 1 Corinthians was written to the Corinthian church, and the author of that book puts it this way, very similar to Solomon. He says this, he says, any pursuit that does not have as its aim the furtherance of God's plan is merely chasing after the wind. So friends, my thought and question for you today is simply this. As you look back and reflect on your life in the past, there probably will be issues and times when, I was chasing the wind back then. But it doesn't have to be that way today. Today God gives us a fresh, brand new start every single day if we choose to take it. So I just hope and pray that if your life is set on the goals of God and, the statutes of God and the things that God has planned and ordained for this life and for your life in particular, that's wonderful. If you look at your life, though, and you talk with God and commune with God about it, and you find that you're chasing the wind in some direction, in some way, start over. Start fresh. Start new. Because today is a beautiful day in the kingdom of God. Thanks, and God bless. Tough Questions for God is a teaching ministry of the Rosebush United Methodist Church, where we challenge our faith with some of the most difficult issues. Tough Questions for God is available on Facebook Live, Sundays at 11:30 a.m., or go on our website at toughquestionsforgod.org and just follow the links on the homepage for YouTube or via podcast. Thanks for joining, and don't forget to like and share. God bless.